Imagine a workplace that was not organized with a tiny group of people at the top, the board of directors, the major shareholders, the executives, who make all the decisions that all the working people, the vast majority, have to live with, always having to do what they're told, always having to be the bottom of a pyramid. Imagine a different arrangement where workers were themselves part of the decision-making apparatus, where workers genuinely were also their own bosses, something most workers say is something they would love. Imagine a workplace organized democratically, so that all the people who work at a place participate in making the decisions that, after all, they all have to live with. That was always the idea of democracy, that the people affected by decisions make them. And so if we really believe in democracy, don't we need to have it at the workplace? The place where we spend most of our adult lives, 9 to 5, 5 out of 7 days of every week? That's where democracy belongs more than anywhere else. That's where it matters the most. And yet we've not allowed that. We've talked for 2 centuries about democracy where we live, in our neighborhoods, in our communities, our cities, our towns, our nations. And it belongs there for sure. But how in the world can we expect there to be democracy in the political world if we don't have it in the economic world on which the political world sits? If we want real democracy anywhere, we've got to have it where we work. And that means changing the economic organization of our enterprises that produce the goods and services we all need. From the top-down, hierarchical, undemocratic capitalist way to the cooperative, democratic organization of enterprises that we've long needed and that the current crisis puts on the agenda for right now. Nothing has been so important for hundreds, even thousands of years of human civilization as the question of the distribution of income. In other words, do we spread the goods and services that we produce in any economy more or less evenly across the society, giving everybody roughly the same, a little more, a little less, but roughly? Or do we allow there to be enormous gaps between a small number of people who gather a huge amount of the income into their hands and a vast amount of people who barely get by, if they get by at all? Which do we want? Equal incomes? Unequal incomes? Slightly unequal? Vastly unequal? That question has led a large number of people to the conclusion that while some inequality is acceptable, it should be kept within limits. We should not allow vast accumulations of wealth in the hands of a tiny number and vast economic difficulty for most of the people. That's been the dream of radicals. It's been the dream of Democrats with a small d. It's been the dream of many. It was, for example, the dream of Thomas Jefferson in making the American Revolution back in the 18th century. How do you realize a roughly equal, an egalitarian distribution of income if you want one? That's been the conundrum, that's been the mystery, because everything that's been tried so far hasn't succeeded, at least in most of the world, most of the time. And one reason is that the people who wanted a more equal distribution of income didn't understand that in order to get that, you have to change the way enterprises, firms, companies, whatever you call them, how they're organized. Let's see how that works. Today, in a capitalist organization, which is what we mostly have, a tiny group of people at the top make the key decision. The major shareholders of companies, a small group of people, and the board of directors that they select, a group of people numbering 15 to 20 at most. They're the ones who make a crucial decision. What portion of the profits, of the net revenue of a company, are distributed to whom? They're the people who decided, for example, starting in the 1970s, to give enormous pay packages to the top executives of a company, to give millions, then tens of millions, and now to some executives, hundreds of millions of dollars, while everybody else gets none of the profits, none of the net revenues distributed to them. Oh, sure, there's a handful of companies that have what they call profit sharing, but there are very few companies, and they don't share much of their profits either. Most profits in most companies are distributed by the board of directors and by the major shareholders who make the final decisions to a tiny handful of people. And that's where the inequality of income in our society comes from. It doesn't come from paying outlandish salaries to athletes, actors, nuh-uh. The bulk of wealth in this country accrues to people who get it either in high salaries as executives or in dividend payments because they're major shareholders and have a lot of shares. If we had a worker self-directed enterprises, if the workers in every enterprise collectively and democratically made the decisions, they would also make the decisions of how to distribute the net revenues or profits of the companies whose profits, after all, their labor creates. And guess what? Every poll shows, every study shows the same. The workers, if they made it directly, collectively, democratically, would never give a tiny number of people vast income while everybody else has a problem. Majority rule would dictate that you distribute the income in a much less unequal way. There might still be more for this kind of work and less for that. More for this official than less for that. More for this worker whose work is difficult or dirty or hard in one way or another. Sure. But in general, working people together in a community organized workplace would distribute the profits of enterprise in a much less unequal way. There's a way to get greater equality of income that will work. And it will show why and how trying to get greater equality without changing the workplace has been such a difficult and ultimately unsuccessful approach. One of the important benefits of reorganizing our workplaces so that they are democratic, so that the workers collectively, one worker, one vote, make the basic decisions, what to produce, how to produce, where to produce, and what to do with the net revenues or profits. One of the benefits focuses on that thing I just mentioned, how to produce. Suppose workers at every workplace decided the how, what technology to use, what machinery, if any, what way of going about producing the goods and services that enterprise is focused on. Here's what we would have. Workers would not choose to use a technology that pollutes the air, that pollutes the water, that creates too much noise, that imposes too much stress. You know why not? Because they have to live with that. They're the front line. They're the ones who work in that office or that factory or that store, breathe that air, drink that water, hear that noise, live that stress. They don't want that. They understand that that could be more damaging than any gain in profit for the company that might come from using a toxic or dangerous technology. Think how different that is from a capitalist enterprise, where a board of directors, perhaps 1,000 miles away, and major shareholders, maybe even further away, they make the decision about which technology to use, what machine, what chemical, and so forth. They make that decision about the bottom line. They want maximum profits. And if they have to use something that isn't so great, but it makes profits better, they'll likely do that. But the workers on the workplace, if they had democratic decision making, they wouldn't. They'd rather forego an increase in profit if it damages their health. And remember, if it does, and they have to go to a doctor or they suffer medical consequences, they might have to end up paying more privately than even the profit was to the company. But because the company gets the profit, but the worker gets the medical bill, the decisions are different. By democratic workplaces, we change that. We will get a decision-making apparatus that will be more likely to respect the environment than anything we see in a capitalist enterprise today. Imagine a workplace that's cooperatively organized, where the workers run the business collectively, cooperatively, and in a democratic way. The whole meaning of work will change. The very work experience will mean something different and shape your life as a working person completely differently. Why? Well, the answer is really quite simple. You become one kind of person if day in and day out you do the same job, in the same place, in the same way, when you're always taking the orders of other people, and that even if your job changes, it's for reasons never made quite that clear to you by other people with other objectives than whatever yours might be. Now imagine a change situation. You're part of the decision-making apparatus. You're part of what directs the enterprise. You're asked as part of your job not just to do a particular function in a process, but you're part of the group that decides what the process is, when and how and in what ways it'll change. You're asked to develop your capacity to design work processes, to control them, to change them, to adjust them. It'll build up your capacities for control and design. It'll tap into your creativity in the way most jobs now never do. And it'll develop you as a person as a result. From drudge work to design work. It is something long overdue. It is the humane way to treat people in the work process, and it's long overdue. Now, some people may say, and I've heard it, well, I don't want to be responsible for things on the job. I like it that other people take the responsibility. Well, you know, people used to say, I don't want to have to come to the job on time. And I don't want to have to come to the job healthy and prepared. And I don't want, there's a lot of things we don't want, but yet if we're required to do them, they build us up. They develop us as people. They enhance our capabilities and capacities. More important than coming on time is the quality of the work experience. Yes, in a cooperative, democratic work process, everybody is required to do their share. It's part of what work means. And we should have been doing it all along. And it's not been good for most of us to be excluded the way we normally see it in capitalist corporations. Exclusion for the mass of people from design, control, direction. We want to be included. We need to realize our full humanity to be included. Workers' self-directed enterprises, workers' cooperatives is the way to transform the work process and in that process transform ourselves as human beings.